I'm just going to let this load. Get rid of that pesky box. Okay, so cell structures part 2. So again, we want to look more at the holistic, inclusive way organelles interact with each other and work together for a common purpose. And so we're going to talk about a few other structures today. The cell membrane. So it really wasn't until fairly recently that I finally figured out the difference between cell membrane and plasma membrane. People often use these terms interchangeably, but really cell membrane is any membrane bound organelle, and the plasma membrane would just refer to the membrane surrounding the cell. So for right now, when I say cell membrane, we're actually talking about the plasma membrane. The structure of the cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. So there are two layers, and the phosphate head has an affinity for water, and the fatty acid tails do not. And so it forms a bilayer because the fatty acid tails turn away from the water and face each other and create that barrier between the inside of the cell and the outside world. Also embedded in the cell membrane are proteins. Those proteins serve a variety of functions, which we'll look at more closely when we talk about cellular transport. Some of those proteins are integral, which mean they span the bilayer. Some of them are peripheral, which means they're just loosely bound to either the inner surface or the outer surface. Also embedded in the plasma membrane is cholesterol. Again, we'll talk more about cholesterol later, but that is a form of steroid, and it just kind of helps maintain membrane fluidity. Keeps the phospholipids from packing together when temperatures are too cold, and then when temperatures get too hot, cholesterol doesn't let them spread out too far from one another. The function of the plasma membrane functions, there are 7 actually. The first is to transport things either into or out of the cell. Also, there can be enzymatic activity at the cell membrane, and that usually is in conjunction with signal transduction. Signal transduction is when a cell receives a signal, and then it has to kind of transduce or change that message as it passes through the membrane, and it causes a cascading set of events that ultimately lead to some sort of cellular response. The plasma membrane functions in cell-to-cell communication, so how cells can talk to each other. Functions in cell-to-cell recognition, so cells can recognize friend versus foe. Are you part of my organism, or are you a pathogen or an invader? Cell membrane functions in cell-to-cell attachment. This allows cells to form tissues, and then tissues form organs, so they kind of attach to each other. And then the plasma membrane also helps maintain the shape of a cell. Vacuoles and vesicles are kind of pretty much the same thing. The structure, they're basically a membrane-bound sac, and their function is storage. They come from the ER and the Golgi, and they typically have products in them, whether it be protein or lipid steroids or whatever it happens to be. Um, Plant cells have one large central vacuole, and it's filled with water. And so the more water, the more turgid the cell is, or the more pressure it has, and the plant stands up nice and straight. When the plant is wilted, that means there's obviously you need to water your plant, but it's literally because the central vacuole is not exerting pressure on that cell wall, and so the plant gets droopy. Certain freshwater protists have contractile vacuoles, which pump out excess water. So, like if you live in a completely water environment, you're going to take on water all the time because the water is in a higher concentration outside of your cell membrane than on the inside. And so they have these little vacuoles that pump it back out to help them maintain homeostasis and not burst. Lysosomes and peroxisomes. The structure of a lysosome is basically a membrane sac of hydrolytic digestive enzymes, so very powerful digestive enzymes. And their function is basically intracellular digestion. So they're going to merge with, food material and help break that down. They're also involved in autophagy, which means like they'll merge with other old cells and they'll break them down, recycling their cell parts to be used again. And then they can also be used in something called apoptosis, which is cell suicide. That's not as scary as it sounds. Sometimes we need cells to go away. And so lysosomes take care of that. In early embryonic development, we all have skin between our fingers. And as we, age, grow larger, that skin, that webbing goes away, and that's due to apoptosis. Peroxisomes, their structure is also, it's a membrane sac of catalase. Catalase is an enzyme that breaks down hydrogen peroxide, which is a waste product of a lot of our cellular processes. So like I said, it breaks down hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2. It can also digest lipids and in seeds and change them to carbohydrates. So as seeds begin to germinate, they can digest the lipids that are stored there, change them to carbs for energy for the seed to use to become a plant. They also detoxify alcohol in the liver. The mitochondria, they kind of look like little footballs, and they're spread all throughout the cell. Their structure, they have a double outer membrane, and then it also has a series of folded internal membranes called the cristae. They also have, mitochondria have their own DNA. And so the idea is of the endosymbiosis theory, they actually might have been their own cell or prokaryote a gazillion years ago that were engulfed by larger cells and just kind of became a part of that cell, and then just were replicated and passed on. And what's interesting is you get your mitochondrial DNA from your mother, because the female egg has all of the organelles and the sperm does not. The sperm is basically just a nucleus with some chromosomes trying to fertilize that egg. The mitochondria's function is cellular respiration. And again, we will go into way more detail about this later on in the course. Cellular respiration consists of 3 steps: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. And the whole goal is to generate ATP, or energy. The chloroplast, obviously only found in plant cells. Its structure is also consists of a double outer membrane, and then it's got a different internal membrane system. It's there are little stacks that kind of look like pancakes or stacks of coins, and those are called thylakoids. Inside those thylakoids are molecules of chlorophyll. Their job is to absorb sunlight and get this whole party of photosynthesis started, so to speak. Chloroplasts also have their own DNA, which is part of the endosymbiosis theory, the idea that chloroplasts may have been their own little prokaryotic cell and were then engulfed by larger eukaryotic cells and then just became a part of it, got copied, and now all plants have chloroplasts. The function of the chloroplast is to perform photosynthesis. So we're going to take carbon dioxide and water, add a little light energy, and create sugar. Photosynthesis takes place in 2 steps: the light-dependent reactions, which occur on the thylakoids, and the Calvin cycle, which actually generates the glucose. And there you go, the end.